On April 6th of 1850, the first major cuneiform tablets from ancient Sumer were publicly translated in Europe. The official explanation was simple. These texts were mythological stories, primitive attempts to explain nature, kingship, and the unknown. But one detail never sat right. These so-called gods didn't behave like metaphors. They arrived from the sky. They issued commands, they extracted resources, they engineered humans, and they left behind written records of labor revolts and internal disputes. Once you see that pattern, you can't unsee it. History didn't disappear. It was rewritten. This is the broken truth. This is the Broken Truth Podcast. I'm your host, Garrett. Today's episode, titled The Anunnaki, Lords of the Sky, Gods, Engineers, or the First Rulers of the Earth. This is not about belief. It's about a story declared settled, before the questions were. The official story begins with archaeology. In the late 19th century, European expeditions uncovered tens of thousands of clay tablets buried beneath Mesopotamian cities like Ur, Uruk, and Nippur. These tablets predated the Bible by millennia and represented the earliest known written language on Earth. Scholars translated them cautiously. What emerged was a pantheon, the Anunnaki. According to mainstream Assyriology, the Anunnaki were not real beings. They were symbolic figures used by early humans to personify natural forces, political authority, and cosmic order. This explanation became institutionalized. Museums curated the narrative. Universities taught it. Academic journals reinforced it. And the public received a simplified conclusion. Primitive people invented gods. According to this framework, the sequence is linear and non-threatening. Early humans feared storms, floods, and famine. They imagined divine beings to explain those forces. Myths reinforced obedience and hierarchy. Kings ruled by divine mandate. Religion filled the gaps before science. Case closed. But this explanation relies on an assumption that rarely gets examined, that ancient people were incapable of accurate record keeping, that they confused metaphor with reality, that they didn't know the difference between symbolism and experience. Yet these same people engineered irrigation systems, legal codes, astronomical calendars, and standardized weights and measures. So the question becomes unavoidable. Why would a civilization capable of bureaucracy, accounting, and law suddenly abandon precision when documenting its gods? Before we go any further, we need to address a detail that's often glossed over. The word Anunnaki does not translate to gods of imagination. It comes from roots, meaning those who came from heaven to earth, or offspring of Anu. Anu was not a metaphor for weather. He was described as a placeholder of authority, a highest-ranking figure. That linguistic framing matters, because the texts don't say the Anunnaki represented power. They say the Anunnaki held it. Language doesn't prove intent, but it does reveal assumptions. And the assumption here is not symbolism, it's hierarchy. The tablets don't read like folklore passed around campfires. They read like administration. They list names, ranks, duties, punishments, and rations. They describe disagreements among the Anunnaki themselves. They record moments of failure. And that is where the official narrative begins to strain, because mythology usually glorifies. These texts document problems. To understand why this material was framed as myth, we have to step back into the world that rediscovered it. The late 1800s were not an age of neutral scholarship. They were an age of empire. European powers were redrawing borders, extracting resources, and rewriting history under the banner of progress. Archaeology was not just about discovery, it was about control. Whoever controlled the past controlled legitimacy. At the same time, traditional religious authority was fracturing. Darwin's theory of evolution had destabilized biblical literalism. Scientific materialism was replacing spiritual explanation. Institutions were under pressure to reconcile ancient texts with modern frameworks. The tablets posed a problem. They were too old to fit cleanly into biblical chronology, too detailed to dismiss casually, too disruptive to leave uninterpreted. So interpretation became containment. When the Epic of Gilgamesh revealed a flood story older than Genesis, scholars reframed it as coincidence or mythic borrowing. When cuneiform was deciphered, translation authority shifted into the hands of a very small academic elite. And during the rise of biblical criticism, anything that suggests divine beings behaving like administrators, not omnipotent gods, became theologically dangerous. This created a filtering process. What could be safely symbolic was emphasized. What felt operational was softened. What sounded technological was allegorized. By the time the Anunnaki reached textbooks, the tone had already been decided, not because the evidence demanded it, but because the moment required it. This wasn't suppression through censorship, it was suppression through framing. This is where the story breaks, because the tablets themselves refuse to cooperate. One of the most overlooked tablet sequences describes something extraordinary, a labor revolt. The lower-ranking workers, described as performing repetitive, exhausting extraction tasks, refuse to continue. They don't pray, they don't worship, they strike. And the response from leadership is not divine wrath, it's problem-solving. The solution described is the creation of a new worker class, humans, formed specifically to absorb the labor burden. That is not mythic storytelling structure. That is organizational failure, followed by restructuring. One tablet describes the Anunnaki creating humans specifically to relieve themselves of labor. Another records a revolt, workers refusing to continue extraction. A third describes punishment, administered from authority above. These are not metaphors for weather, they are descriptions of systems. The text speaks of beings who descended to Earth, not spiritually, physically. They speak of lineage, of blood, of lifespan differences, and critically, of limits. These beings argue, they make mistakes, they correct errors. That is not how myths usually portray gods. That is how organizations behave. Theory A, symbolic mythology. The strongest defense of the official view is that humans anthropomorphize power, but this theory fails to explain consistency. Symbolism changes culture to culture, yet the structure here remains constant. Hierarchy, command, labor, control. Why does symbolism look like management? Theory B, lost advanced civilization. This theory gains traction when technology is removed from the conversation. Advanced does not mean futuristic. It means organized. It means systemic. It means capable of shaping humanity's trajectory. But the erasure question remains. If a civilization existed, why is it missing? Or more importantly, why would we expect it to survive? At this point, critics usually ask the same question. Where is the physical evidence? But that question assumes something most modern archaeology rarely has: time. Floods erase coastlines, tectonics recycle landmasses, ice ages reset geography. We routinely fail to preserve civilizations from a few thousand years ago, yet we expect proof from far deeper time. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, it's evidence of loss. And loss is a recurring theme in human history. Theory C, non-human intelligence. This theory refuses comfort. It suggests the Anunnaki were not gods, nor humans, but something else. Beings with power, limitations, and interests. The reason it is avoided is simple. It reframes humanity, not as the apex, but as the product. Once is an anomaly. Twice is coincidence. 3 times is a pattern. And this pattern is global. In Genesis, the Watchers descended and alter humanity. In Greece, the gods arrive, rule, and retreat. In Mesoamerica, sky beings create humans through trial. Different cultures, same story, architecture. Arrival, intervention, control, withdrawal. And every time, modern institutions respond the same way. It's myth, it's symbolic, it's settled, but repetition is not random. Here's why the story keeps resurfacing. Because it mirrors something we still live inside. Small ruling classes, centralized authority, controlled knowledge, labor systems justified as necessary, and narratives that frame hierarchy as inevitable. Ancient texts didn't just preserve a story, they preserved a template. And templates survive long after their creators vanish. Repetition is memory. So we have the Anunnaki's governance moving toward modern power systems and how they correlate. What if the Anunnaki's story didn't end? What if it didn't need to? Because systems don't require their creators to remain present. They only require successors willing to operate them. The tablets don't just describe beings. They describe structures: hierarchy, centralized authority, resource extraction, labor specialization, knowledge restriction, punishment for noncompliance. These are not divine traits, they are governance mechanics. And those mechanics didn't disappear when the Anunnaki narrative stopped. They scaled. In the tablets, authority flows downward, knowledge flows selectively, labor exists to serve a ruling class, and rebellion is framed as disorder, not justice. Now, compare that to modern power systems: governments, corporations, financial institutions, technocratic oversight bodies, different language, but same structure, control without presence. The Anunnaki texts describe rulers who eventually withdraw. They don't destroy the system, they leave it running. Kings inherit divine authority, priests inherit interpretation, scribes inherit knowledge control. In modern terms, this looks like legacy institutions replacing founders, bureaucracy replacing rulers, and policy replacing decree. Power no longer needs a visible god, it only needs compliance, knowledge as a controlled resource. One of the most consistent elements in Anunnaki-related texts is restricted knowledge. Humans are created to work, not to understand. Knowledge is granted conditionally. Punishment follows unauthorized access. This pattern persists. Modern systems don't ban knowledge outright. They fragment it, gatekeep it, bury it under credentialism. Information exists, but not equally, and access determines power. That isn't progress. That is continuity. Genetic language toward biological authority. Ancient texts describe humanity as modified, formed, adjusted, and limited. Modern power systems no longer speak in mythological terms, but the concept remains. Biological authority now appears as medical governance, reproductive policy, genetic research, and pharmaceutical dependence. Control shifts from divine creation to biological regulation. The methods change. The objective does not. So why this connection is never made? Because connecting ancient control systems to modern ones breaks a critical illusion. The illusion that power evolved away from domination, instead of perfecting it. If the Anunnaki narrative is symbolic, it's symbolic of something real. Not gods, but origin-level power systems. And the most dangerous idea isn't that ancient beings ruled humanity, it's that their system still does. The Anunnaki may not need to exist anymore, because their framework does. And once a system proves effective, it doesn't disappear, it replicates. And once a system becomes invisible, the strongest force protecting it is the human mind itself. Authority bias protects consensus, social penalties discourage dissent, cognitive dissonance preserves identity, narratives provide safety. Truth isn't always rejected because it's wrong. Sometimes it's rejected because it destabilizes who we think we are. There's a reason this subject is labeled myth, because myth doesn't need rebuttal. It doesn't require investigation. It doesn't demand accountability. Once something is myth, it becomes safe, and safety is often the final stage of suppression. Why were alternative translations marginalized? Who benefits from defining gods as imaginary? Why do early texts describe creation as engineering? What happens if humanity was shaped intentionally? This isn't about belief, it's about accountability. And unanswered questions don't disappear, they wait. Sources and tablets are linked below. Read them yourself. Thank you for listening to the Broken Truth Podcast. Until next time, stay awake, stay aware, and stay questioning the narrative.
In a world built on hidden histories and half-truths, we've only just begun to peel back the layers. Because what you've heard tonight was never meant to be known, but you were meant to find it. If you're ready to go deeper, leave us a review, comment your thoughts, share this episode, and step inside the archives. Join the inner circle, where the real evidence is kept. This is the broken truth, because the truth isn't whole, it's broken.